It's lovely to see so many people joining us today. I think if we've learned one lesson already from this morning, people want to know about evaluation. There is a hunger, a desire out there for you guys to be able to tell your stories in as effective a way as possible. And I think we brought the right guy into this session to help you do that. We've known Paddy for quite some time. I met him when he was still working with Helpforce. For you guys that maybe don't know Helpforce, they turned into something of a powerhouse around volunteering within the NHS. And these masterclasses for us we love bringing people like Paddy to meet you guys who's got something unique and different to share and to say, and hopefully to help you do your job. Maybe we talk about these things, simple ideas delivered in a way that makes it nice and easy, nice and accessible for you guys to go and take away this stuff and do it for yourself. His work in Helpforce taught him an awful lot around evaluation, and he's poured all that experience into his own venture, Patchworks. It's a brilliant approach, which is patch-based, which I really like from his website, knitting together neighbourhoods, services and volunteers to help people personally, to help service delivery. So we're hoping today's going to be a really exciting, interesting session. If you have any questions for me as we're going along, if you pop them in the chat on the right side, most people, it seems, have now found the chat, which is great. We've got lots of people telling us why they're here and where they're from. And we will be picking that up on behalf of Paddy, and we'll be passing on questions back to him. We'll get through as many as we can in the session. But obviously, there's a lot of you on the call. We may not be able to get through everything. If you don't have to worry about taking lots of frantic notes, we will be recording the session. We'll be sharing that with everybody that has signed up. And the slides will be available afterwards as well. And if you want to learn more about Paddy's work, then you can go to patchworks.org.uk. If you'd like to leave your cameras on, it's lovely to see people's faces, but we appreciate you may be in an office, you may be busy, or you may be doing something else at the same time. So that's absolutely fine. But those that do want to leave the cameras on, that is great. Your microphones are all switched off. We may come to you to ask questions at certain times. I'll leave that in Paddy's capable hands. And Google, we are lucky because we're on the slightly fancier version of Google Meet, where we get all the emojis. And it's always helpful for a speaker to get a sense of whether or not you agree or you disagree with what he's saying. So if you look at the bottom of the screen there, you can use the emojis to add a little bit of color, add a little bit of spice, a little bit of thought to what Paddy's saying as he's delivering, and let him know if he's on the right on the right lines, or maybe he's wandered into something more controversial. That's enough for me. I'm going to pass over to Paddy Hanrahan from Patchworks. Paddy, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Very kind words. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to meet you all. I'd love to see the fact that I've had a couple of mushrooms come up already, and a football, which is great, which is actually very apt when I come and introduce myself in a moment. Yeah, really kind intro. Thank you, Chris. I've got a lot of time for Chris and TeamKinetic, and Chris has been a wonderful support to me since I decided to do the crazy thing of going up on my own and starting my own business. Right, so what are we going to cover today? Let me just bring up my slides. Can you see that okay? Is that coming through well? Yeah, great. So yeah, you saw the kind of advert, what I'm hoping to get out of today and what I'm hoping you're going to get out of today. Clear on what strong credible impact looks like. Understand 3 key shifts that can get you from weaker evidence, which is reporting on your activity, to outcome-based, showing real evidence of change. With a bit of focus on volunteers and how we can show volunteer value, something I'm very passionate about, and when to do evaluation yourself versus bringing in external help. Okay, so bear with me a second, I'm just going to quickly slip out of that. So they're the goals I want to get out of it, but what's been helpful, Chris, from your intro is that we've had lots of comments here about what others and what our guests want to get out of it. And I'm just going to scan through, I'm just going to capture on this slide some of the bits that have been raised, and then we're going to come back to it at the end and just kind of test me and assess me and see how we've done with this session in terms of helping you with some of these bits. So I don't know if Rolf and Alex, you can help me by just pulling out some of the few of the comments here in terms of what people want to get out of the session. I've just captured a few as Chris was doing his intro there.
So we've got telling those individual stories.
Yeah.
Impact reporting.
Storytelling I've got.
Rachel, just learning new stuff like that.
Yeah.
Individual experience into action.
Yeah, and benchmarking.
Capturing voice.
Emma from Willowbrook mentions about just internal messaging, making sure that everyone else in the organisation understands the value of the volunteering within the organisation.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Let the organisation know how amazing volunteers are. I love that one from Emma.
Yeah.
Got quite a few there.
Okay, I think we've got a few there, but if there's any more, we'll come back and add them later. But just always find it's a good way of kind of starting end of the session in terms of just kind of trying to capture expectations. Okay, just a little bit about me, so you know, hopefully I can try and convince you that I know what I'm talking about. My background was management consulting, and my background's kind of digital IT. That was kind of what I did for my degree. Spent 13 years at big management consultancy, Accenture. Most of that was in the NHS, doing kind of big digital transformation, big national systems. And I had my midlife crisis about 12, 13 years ago, decided that I would love to go to the charity sector and put my skills there. And particularly passionate about trying to prove impact. I kind of found that I was supporting a lot of kind of charities in terms of my donations, and was never really getting what I wanted to see in terms of the impact that money was making. So that was my ambition. I helped launch and establish 2 national charities: the Centre for Aging Better, where I learned a lot about evidence. It's a kind of what works centre, a real evidence specialist. And then Chris mentioned I started Helpforce with Sir Tom Hughes Hallett about 9-10 years ago. And that essentially was to try and help transform volunteering in hospitals. So we tried to introduce a lot more kind of high impact roles into the kind of hospital system, but also out into kind of a lot of community organisations that are working within the health system. We built a national network. In fact, I think on today's call, my ex-colleague Sally, who helped me build and run the Helpforce network, and built a network of people like yourselves, volunteer managers that are working within health and care, volunteer managers, volunteer coordinators. And in that network, essentially had a great kind of community of practice for sharing great ideas, good practice, and great new roles and innovations. The most high impact thing, the thing I was most proud of at Helpforce, was that we spent the last 5 years building an evidence and evaluation service and a really fantastic team that did about 90 evaluations, trying to prove the value of volunteering. So looking at how volunteering actually is beneficial to the volunteers, lots of evidence around that, but crucially how volunteers improve things for people out in the community, for patients, for NHS staff. There was a real dearth of evidence when we started that really proved that volunteers make a difference. And by the time I left Helpforce, we had, I think, over 90 evaluations done and a database of about 500 pieces of new evidence, outcome-based evidence that proved volunteers were making a difference. And that led to us getting a GSK Impact Award last year. I decided then to take what was a great idea, my idea, but one I built with the benefit of the team at Helpforce, but to take it out into Patchworks and really focus on community organisations, small and medium-sized charities where they may not have the in-house ability to do really good evidence of their impact, or just need that external independent evaluator to come in and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. Outside of my professional life, I'm very passionate about volunteering. I live in Tulse Hill, South London. I've volunteered with a lot of different groups. I'm a staunch believer that community is the answer to much of our kind of social issues and challenges that we have in this country. The safety net due to austerity of so many things having funding cuts, particularly at local authority level, means that our charities on the ground and a lot of these community organisations, community businesses are the ones that are providing that safety net. And I believe that those communities need empowering and supporting with good evidence so they can get the funding they need to survive. But with Tulse Hill, that's a football club. It's London's oldest football club. I volunteer as a club secretary and I'm a coach. Been doing that the last 4 years, but I even did an evaluation of my football club to show the power and the impact that the volunteers, the coaches have on kids and their futures. So it was kind of a good good way of kind of linking my personal and professional life. What's the big problem? What's the problem I was trying to solve with Patchworks, and I've been trying to solve, I guess, my entire career, is that most organisations I meet don't lack impact. You know, the vast majority of small charities, community pubs, bigger charities, KICs, social enterprises I come across, of course they're having an impact. And many of the leaders I meet are just absolutely incredible characters doing amazing work. The challenge they have is they struggle to evidence it. Maybe a second. Chris, can you still see my screen right now?
How's the turn the microphone on? Yeah, I can still see your screen. Yeah.
Is it still presenting, or is it showing my notes?
It's showing your notes as well.
Okay. So I can't find a way of doing a presenting so that it shows slide mode. Bear with me a second, folks. I'm just trying to. How do I do presenting?
The joys of moving from Teams to Google to Zoom.
No,
it's all there somewhere. I can see. We can just see your screen now. We can't see your notes.
Wait, it shows my notes, but just to me. Any tips, Alex or Roll?
Oh. That one where you show the screen, and then can you do the presenter notes over the top? In view. Anybody else on the call that's more of a PowerPoint expert? We will take.
I've worked in Teams, and I've kind of joined the Google Meet. I'm like, I know how to do this in Teams.
Catches me out every time, this Patrick. I always struggle with it as well. Not showing the notes.
Right. Well, I'm going to just read from my notes. I'm just hoping.
That's okay. That's all right.
So yeah, I mean, what I was going to say here is I've read over 300 different charity annual impact reports. I see always great quotes. I see lots of great stats. I see activities about we've reached 300 kids this year, or we had 55 volunteers. We had these many sessions. The reality is that is just activity. What I see a lot more rarely is the ability to kind of really to turn that into kind of strong evidence, and that's what we're going to talk about in this call, and then put it into an strong overarching narrative. Tell a story that shows that you've got good quality evidence of the impact you're making, and put it into a story that people will want to read. This is particularly crucial at the moment. I'm supporting probably about 20-30 clients at the moment around wanting to strengthen their applications, either reporting on programs to existing major donors or wanting to strengthen their funding applications. And again, I see a lot of listing of activities, and the real change just doesn't come through. And the end result is that it's really hard to differentiate yourself. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this call if you're involved with fundraising, but right now it's never been more competitive. It's really, really hard. Funders are getting inundated with kind of AI supported applications. But the thing that can really differentiate you is having really good, strong evidence to show that your organization and your people and your volunteers are making a difference to your people. So let me slide mode. I guess I'd be interested in the chat. Why do you think, if your organization struggle with this, what is it that you think you struggle with? We'll come back to this in a second with a poll that I did on a webinar I did last month. But yeah, I'll be quite interested to hear if this is a problem that resonates. What is it that you think you're finding hard? So I guess the key thing I'm trying to share today is what are my 3 shifts that I look at when I look at an organization that has maybe weaker evidence, and what I do to try and help them get stronger. And the 3 shifts that I always look for, importantly, activity, which is reporting what you did, to outcomes, which is what changed in particular for the people that your end users, your beneficiaries. Volume to focus, so trying to measure everything through to a kind of focus on measuring what matters. And then finally, data, a lot of numbers and quotes and stats into meaning, wrapping it around an evidence narrative. So the first shift, activity to outcomes. This is, for me, the most important thing, is that you've got to start with defining your outcomes. You've got to not define too many. You've got to work out what you've got to do, a kind of mashup of what is our mission? Why does this organization exist? What's the change we're trying to deliver in the world for those people we support? But also match it to the work you do. Because quite often, sometimes your mission statement or what you've created the organization for doesn't always match with the work you do on the ground. So it's got to match the work that you're doing on the ground. But I don't think I've met too many organizations who don't get this point. I think most organizations do. But it's the challenge they have is then going, okay, well, how many outcomes should we have? What are those outcomes? How do we clearly define them? How do we then measure those outcomes? And so it does seem to be a thing that organizations really struggle with. As I just mentioned, I did a webinar with 50 leaders of charities last month. And I did a quick poll to start to kind of go, which of these things do you find most difficult right now? Defining clear outcomes, how to measure those outcomes. So actually, the most popular one was we've got outcomes, but we really struggle to kind of measure them. Collecting the right evidence to then prove those outcomes. Analyzing and crunching the data, less so, but was up there. And then telling a compelling story was also a high scored one. And I don't know if you're happy just to put in the chat whether, if you were to say what your biggest challenge is evidencing your impact is, if you want to just maybe put one of those 5 in there. If it's not one of those 5, there's a different one. Very interested to see. I'll just come out of that just to see if there is anything.
We've got a couple in the chat, Paddy, just to let you know. We've got measuring impact sometimes can't be measured in numbers or data.
Yeah, completely agree. We'll come back to that. Yeah.
And the other one, which was interesting, is we support people that then can't be reached again. It's difficult to evidence the outcomes.
Yeah. Okay. All very good points. So as I mentioned, defining your outcomes is I don't think it's easy. I think it is quite a difficult thing. I mentioned there about linking it to your mission, the work you do. I think the other thing I see with a lot of the clients I work with is they'll start off with a number of outcomes and then they'll get dragged because they wanted to chase a new piece of funding, and so therefore they create a new program to chase that funding, and then there's a whole load of new outcomes that are created. And so therefore you have almost too many outcomes, and it grows and it goes arms and legs. And then questions around, should they be standardized? Actually, should we be using some sort of kind of standardized outcomes? And that's really challenging because there's not just one standard. I know I use a kind of outcome set of standardized outcomes that tries to map to a number of different things out there, like sustainability and delivery goals. But then you've got things like for well-being, the What Works Centre, What Works Wellbeing Centre. You've got WebMES. You've got all these different standards out there, and it's really hard to know which ones to use. And then finally, in terms of how to measure in them, what questions should I be asking, my users? And then as someone just mentioned, it's not just the quant, it's really important. This, the qual for me is much more important. So just so in case I'm talking nonsense, the quantitative, that's the statistical stuff that you're asking typically from surveys, but the qualitative stuff, the case studies, the quotes, and the stories, that stuff is more important. It's more human. The stats might go to be good for convincing people in terms of the head, but in terms of winning over people's hearts, the stories, the qualitative stuff is really, really important. I'm just going to give a bit of an example of kind of what strong can look like. This is a recent report I did for a client called Healthy Living Platform. They're a charity based in Brixton that essentially distributes surplus healthy food that the supermarkets don't buy off the farmers. We've got a massive problem in this country where 99% of the surplus food is going to landfill. So they take it into a kind of warehouse and send it off to 2,500 forced households in Lambeth. And previously with HLP, I saw their annual impact reports, and it really was just, we did this many sessions, we got this amount of food out. There was no real impact there on, well, what difference is it making to your beneficiaries? They just didn't know. So we started off by designing outcomes for residents, which is how we define their kind of ultimate end users, people who use their food services. These are people who go to pantries or get food deliveries to their door. Not free food like a food bank, but cheap food that they could buy to kind of keep their dignity, that was healthy food and would reduce their bills. And we would essentially look at just 3 or 4 outcomes for residents. It's things like diet and nutrition, the social benefit of going to these pantries, and then crucially, the one we asked them about, which was their economic security, cost of living. And so what you can see here is back to that point about outcomes. We've taken a standardized outcome, in this case, the top right corner there, economic security. We've got some quant. So on the left-hand side, you can see there's a statement, the food service helped me reduce my household food costs, 86% agreed or strongly agreed. We asked another question, which is how much has it saved you? So you've got a couple of really good quant graphs, presented nicely. That wins over the head. Yeah, I can see statistically 242 residents. That's a decent number. That tells me this works. But the real value then comes from some of the quotes. So what we've got in the bottom right corner there is some of the quotes that we took from them, but they're mapped to the outcome. They're not just floating in a report. We say these are ones that are relevant to economic security. And then what I do with interviews is then I went and interviewed someone in the pantry and asked them about their impact in terms of saving money. So I did interview this guy, lovely guy, Paul. And so what we've captured here is a bit of a story that kind of strengthens that outcome. So I know that a lot of you on this call will be out there at the front line, either through yourselves directly or through your volunteers. You get these incredible stories back, but sometimes what do we do with them? And my advice would be link them to an outcome, because by that it's just going to strengthen in the mind of your reader, say a funder, that we are making a difference and here's a tangible way that we are. Hopefully that is kind of demonstrates that point. Do let me know if there's any hands up or any questions as we go. The second shift is volume to focus. Now, this is where we want to differentiate between monitoring and measuring the outcome, the change. When it comes to monitoring, you can monitor everything, and so monitoring is activity. It's like how many people came to this session. At the end, did this session work? What could improve? That's monitoring, and the more the better. But when it comes to measuring impact, we really want to try and restrict having too much and having focus. As I mentioned there with my Healthy Living platform client, they started off with about 30 or 40 outcomes, and we boiled that down to about 4 or 5 for residents and a few for volunteers, and then some economic benefit ones as well. But you've got to have focus, because the challenge is that one, trying to prove 20, 30 outcomes, extremely difficult unless you've got a huge internal impact team. Even then, I think it's hard. But crucially, when you come out the other side, and we're going to talk about this, when you come to report on it, it's just overwhelming. Anyone who reads that is just going to go, oh my goodness, that's like, oh, it's like they've got 25 outcomes here. I can't see wood for the trees. With Healthy Living platform, it's 4. It's like diet, nutrition, the social cohesion and support, cost of living, and I can't remember the other one was. But essentially, it's so much easier for an external audience, or as someone mentioned before, an internal audience, to understand your impact if you can just keep it to a few measures. The other thing I see working with a lot of charities is they mix up a lot of the data they're getting back. They just say to you, Paddy, I've just got more data than I can deal with. And again, it's the fact that they can mix up impact measurement with monitoring. So I can see that they'll send me survey responses, and they've got a survey response at the end of every session where they're asking about feedback on the session, they're asking about your satisfaction, and then they're asking about, is your mental health gone up? You're kind of then mixing up all your monitoring and measurement, and it's just, you've got too much data. Try and separate them out. Have a real focus on, I'm going to do once a year, I'm going to ask a small set of questions that's just about my outcomes, just about the impact and the change. So that focus is really, really important. Bear me a second, I'm going to check the notes. Yeah, again, we've talked about this, but everything about measuring what matters. And so, again, small number of outcomes. What's the quant, the stats, the qual, the kind of the human stories, the quotes? How can I combine that and link that to my outcome? And then just as an example on this one, with Healthy Living Platform, the report we were writing from this is an excerpt from the report, but the report we were writing was essentially starting to look a bit too bloated. And as I say, we'll come back to this, but the narrative, the evidence narrative, needs to be something really readable. And we actually had a survey out on this one to 35 of their volunteers, and we asked about essentially four different outcomes: connection to community, whether they felt that their time and skills was making a difference, whether their own skills and confidence had increased, and whether it helped them in terms of a pathway into future careers. And to be honest with that, it was when we started breaking that into lots of slides, it was too many. And again, it was about that focus. So we took these four different stats, we added some quotes at the bottom there, and we actually rounded it up into one, which was volunteer experience and impact. And it was really important because at one point it looked like we were going to take volunteers completely out of their report, because their focus for their funders they're trying to reach was residents. Actually, I love volunteering more than anyone, but for their report, their focus needed to be on the residents, because they need to prove to a lot of big funders like the lottery that we are helping some of the poorest people out in the community. These food parcels are vital. And you don't want to dilute it then by having lots and lots and lots of slides about the volunteers, who are important, but for the purpose of their report, were not as crucial. But we didn't want to lose it. So this is a good example where with reporting on volunteers, we did explore a number of different outcomes that are important for those volunteers, but then in terms of reporting on it, it was to complement the overarching narrative, which was about supporting people out in the community, which these volunteers did. So you can see here just a kind of a good example of where you combine the quad and the cons, but just trying to keep that focus, not having too many outcomes, particularly when you've got multiple beneficiaries like residents and volunteers. So a quick activity, just to try and make this a bit more practical for your own work, and just so I can hear from other people and it's just not me talking for the entire session. But just to try and put this into practice. So as I just talked through there, if you were to think I think you're all organisations that manage volunteers. I think that's the audience today. If you think about what your volunteers actually do on the ground, try and think of one outcome that they are then helping in terms of their end users, the people you're there to serve, your beneficiaries. Think of just one outcome. If you were forced to just choose one outcome that your organisation wishes it could prove, and then what would you collect? So in the chat, if you could just maybe put in one outcome you would measure, and then if you'd be willing to stick your hand up, I would love to just have a chat with any of you in terms of what do you think your approach would be to go and try and prove that outcome. Yeah, just while you're waiting for that and just looking at some of the comments, Sally says, a relatively small volunteer team, it's tricky to gather enough robust data to turn into evidence that one funders. Yeah, I mean I think that's a question on volume. And I think that is a real challenge. I think that there is higher numbers always look better in evidence. But what I would say is that it's still always worth trying to capture it.
We've got one come in from Access Dorset. Increasing confidence of people with disabilities, track through looking at participation rates, and the number of people who step up to lead sessions themselves. So yeah, confidence is a fantastic outcome to choose. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with a number of children's charities, and confidence, there's a lot of evidence out there that shows that confidence is one of the greatest things that you can instill in a child in terms of giving it great future prospects. And the same is true for adults and for different groups, including people with disabilities. It's such a strong enabler of other outcomes that follow it. So I think that's a really good one. Tracy has popped her hand up. She's got something she wants to share with us.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Patrick. I'm sorry, I was struggling with technology then.
You're not the only one.
I'm from Burnley Pendle and Rosendale Council for Voluntary Service, and we deliver quite a number of projects. We've recently developed a theory of change, but we are struggling to evidence impact, and to use somebody's words in the chat, wow the funders, because funding is so scarce these days. But one of the things about our volunteers is helping partners and stakeholders to have a good understanding and knowledge of volunteering, about the best practice and impact of changes in policy and practice, which is really difficult to do because they just see volunteering as, oh, it's somebody free that'll do it, so I'll let them just get on with it. But what they don't understand is that infrastructure that has to be around volunteers to keep them safe, to keep the people that they're helping safe. And our volunteers, I mean, when in your example where it says activity, what do your volunteers do? They do all sorts of stuff. So, you know, from going and helping somebody with the shopping to fixing hearing aids, to, you know, replacing a battery in a hearing aid, to accompanying them to activities, that kind of thing. So because we've got so many different projects, our volunteers do so many different things, it is really difficult as an organisation to measure and record that impact. We're trying desperately, and we tend to do it in separate things. But what you said, Patrick, earlier really rang true. The annual impact report is not an impact report, it's just a monitoring report. You know, talking about how many sessions we've, who cares how many sessions we've held, who cares how, there's only funders care about that, but what impact has it actually made? We have some great case studies which we also put in there, but yeah, I really got your point about linking the outcomes to the case studies.
Yeah, that's some great points. Thank you, Tracy. I think that value of volunteering thing is something we've battled for years in health force, because health leaders and people running hospitals just did not understand the value of volunteers. They just thought they were either free labour or, you know, and at the bottom of the ranking, so below a band 4, you know, cleaner of a hospital, and they just saw them as free resource. And volunteers are not free. You know, they're fantastic value for money, but they're not free. And I appreciate your challenge. I think it's really hard when volunteers are doing a wide array of things to then say, well, what's the outcome? But I would just suggest boiling it down to the simplest thing, and that is usually, you know, the difference it's making to that person they're helping. You know, one good question that I find is most effective is for your volunteer to ask, and this doesn't need to be a survey, it's a conversation, but what would your life be like if I wasn't volunteering for you? If I wasn't helping you and you didn't have someone doing this role, what would it be? What we kind of call a counterfactual. What would happen if this wasn't there? That's a fantastic way to start, because the insights you'll get back from that will show your leadership. This is the real value of volunteers, because when they disappear, this is what it looks like. This is the impact it will have on these people's lives. You know, for the example I showed there, Health Living platform, you know, we had some really great stories about volunteers. If they didn't run this pantry, the pantry would shut. That was 600 people not receiving food deliveries, receiving, you know, and getting fresh hot meals. So that would be a good way of, I think, firstly, proving very quickly to your bosses the value of your volunteers. But secondly, I think what you'll get from that is you'll find those two or three outcomes from that, asking that question. By saying to people, what do you really value when this thing is gone, you'll get a sense from that. Okay, actually, the things we're seeing here are, you know, social cohesion or isolation. Actually, they'd be really lonely if they didn't have it. The confidence to be able to do tasks around the house, it will come out of that. So I think that would be what I'd give you in terms of a bit of a, you know, practical advice, Tracy.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to talk to me? Come on. I know it's easy to just listen, but does anyone else want to have a chat with me and tell me what they've put on here? Lorraine.
So we run a charity supporting children between the age of 6 and 8 with primary school maths, and volunteers go in and support children on a one-to-one basis, plugging gaps from previous years' curriculum. We currently look at impact via teacher survey at the end of the year. So there's a survey per child, and it asks questions on confidence, enjoyment, engagement, anxiety, and hopefully they've improved or lessened depending on the measure. We also ask for general comments on the child and on our charity in general. I think one thing we So what we don't do is like baseline assessment and exit assessments, because the children we support could, you know, continue to struggle, say, with understanding pairs of numbers to 10 throughout the year because they have quite profound needs. So measuring from that sense is more challenging. And the other thing we don't currently do but want to do is to develop pupil voice. So we don't actually hear anything from the children, and we haven't really as yet worked out how to actually discover what our main beneficiaries think about us because of, given their age, possible issues with parental consent. We work across about over 40 schools in London, so we've got logistics of getting in their anonymity, confidentiality, etc. So just wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, researching with children is just extremely difficult, and rightly so, you know, because the access to them has to be very, very carefully managed. And also, that it sounds horrible, but they're not. Research showed they're not particularly reliable narrator of their own feelings. You know, so actually, if you were to survey them directly, they wouldn't actually give their honest answers, which is just a fact. So yeah, I'm doing a project at the moment with primary school age children, and it's really hard. And you're right, the best route is through a proxy. So teachers, as you're doing right now, but I would try and supplement that with the view of the parents. Okay. So the group I'm working with right now, we're doing a survey of the parents to ask their view on the children. It's a proxy because it's one step removed, but it's good enough, it's strong enough, and it gives you a really different view to just having the teacher view, to have the family view of how they see their child different, because the teachers will be looking at an educational perspective, and the personal kind of side in terms of things like their confidence and their skills and other elements. I think that the family are in a really good position, the parents are in a really good position to comment on that. I mean, and really then some interviews to capture some of those stories and some of those rich narratives. I mean, we're doing interviews with the families, with the parents and the child together. We've planned a few of those, because then you see them in interaction. You see the parents will comment on their behalf, the children will chip in with kind of little things like that. Sometimes they may not say much, but just a few of those interviews can really supplement the surveys, the quant stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really helpful. Yeah, I think we have like similar challenges to everyone else of like increasing our numbers and the number of children we reach, as well as, obviously making sure we sort of deliver, good quality support which has impact. So yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful.
No worries. On that point, I'll just mention that Sally also mentioned about when you're starting quite small and you might not have really high volumes. And the truth is that if you're doing a survey of only 10 or 20 people, from a quant point of view, it's not particularly strong. But that's where the qual stuff is much more important in those early stage stuff, because you're getting that feedback from your beneficiaries and your volunteers to say, is it working? And that's really powerful. The only way you really grow is to kind of know that it's working. But it's also the insights you get back that tells you where things are improvement. So in each of my reports, I have a section which is what could work better, where can this improve? And that comes from a lot of the kind of qualitative questions in the interviews, because everything can improve. You want to show in a balanced kind of evaluation that that we're also open to learning and improving. Okay, I will move on unless there's any more hands up. The last shift, data to meaning. So data, got the so many terms that get thrown around. But by data, this is what I see in a lot of impact reports is, numbers, activity numbers, thrown in with the, they'll call it a case study, but it's often just a quote that's not really attached to outcomes. It's just there, and it's kind of just dumped into a huge long kind of impact report and say, look, aren't we brilliant? But actually for your reader, this is the thing that I feel most strongly about, and my biggest learning in working evaluation the last 6 or so years is that everything you produce in terms of an annual report or an evidence report means nothing if nobody reads it. There's so many reports I've read, reports done on national programs by the King's Fund. My wife reading reports by the King's Fund, and they're just so dry and so long, and nobody reads them. And then annual reports, it's like I say to charities, who do you think reads this? Have you tracked? Do your beneficiaries read this? Do your volunteers read it? Do your funders read it? like, actually, what's the point of putting this all together unless someone's going to read it? And this is the last big shift. It's then saying, I've got evidence proved against outcomes. How do I now weave this into a narrative, an overarching story that someone really wants to read, is going to read, and crucially, take action on? And obviously, right now, what we really want is funders to read it and to go, yeah, this is really powerful. I'm moved to kind of support you. In my reports, what I do, and this is again Healthy Living platform, is a lot of reports will often sit on the fence and say this suggests this, this suggests this. If the evidence is strong and robust enough, like it was in this report, you then pull this together into a kind of stepping back and saying why this matters. And so the Healthy Living platform, we wanted to make the point that Lambeth has got huge numbers of poverty and food insecurity, and this is making a difference, as we've proven in this report. The hub does more than distribute food, it builds community. We had a lot of measures in here about social cohesion and tackling social isolation. And that's, again, a huge problem out in particularly the older communities in Lambeth. And the model is high impact, low cost, hard to replace. I did a social return on investment analysis in this that showed that it generates £5 of value for every £1 invested. That sort of thing is really powerful. But it's also just about the fact that, you know, they've spent 9 years building this community infrastructure. And if you don't fund it and it disappears, again, that counterfactual, there's going to be a huge impact. And I actually met at one of the events that we were doing to try and raise money for this charity, my local MP, Helen Hayes, and I captured this really quote from her about this is infrastructure that can't easily be rebuilt. The point is, as we look at the evidence, you're writing a report, you've got to try and walk in the shoes of your reader and say to them, I've just shown you some evidence that against my outcome that we're making a difference. Now I want to tell you why this matters and why you need to support us. And I think that that's something that's really lost in a lot of evidence reports, annual reports that I read. So we'll share these slides around, so I won't drain this, but in terms of, I'd say, takeaway for you, you know, turning impact into evidence, define clear outcomes, you know, small number, most meaningful outcomes. You know, someone mentioned earlier a theory of change. You know, a good theory of change shouldn't have lots and lots of outcomes. It should have a few, and they should be ones that that your work is proving it does reflect the work that you do. Collecting the right data, we mentioned quant and qualitative, making sure that everything hangs off your outcomes and links back to it. Try not to get pulled everywhere. I've worked with so many charities that are just doing so many different programs and so many different outcomes. Try and stay really focused. And then, as I just mentioned, turning that into a clear story. What changed, for who, why it matters. So the difference you make is working and weaving their voices. You saw earlier with that story and that photo of the people it's benefiting. You know, get that to really come through. You know, these people value your organization. Get their voice into your report. So the other question I got when I did the webinar last month, and I've done a couple of slides now in response to this, is so Patchworks is kind of independent external evaluation, but the vast majority of organizations are doing internal evaluation. When would I do one versus the other? Now, your bread and butter needs to be your internal evaluation. You know, you can't outsource it, or you've got to be able to do some yourself. And so my recommendations are your regular monitoring and reporting, your annual reports, your annual measurements, your day-to-day monitoring, definitely in-house, reporting for your smaller donors, you know, the work that's focused on your learning, collecting insights and improving your work, and where you've got internal skills and capacities. I know there's a few large organizations on this call where we'll have an internal kind of impact team, I'm sure, who do that. Where external support can add value is where you've got a major milestone, like a major report by one of your donors that's coming to the end. I'm doing about 5 projects at the moment with clients who have got like 5 years of lottery funding and coming to the end. They really want to wow them and show them that this program money worked. You're preparing for major funding. I'm getting a lot of this right now, either like Healthy Living platform, we're trying to survive, organizations trying to grow, but to try and differentiate themselves on major funding bids, you might get external support. And what external support can give you is clarifying your organizational outcomes. You know, as I did with Healthy Living platform, you know, it's really helpful to have someone with a fresh pair of eyes who can come in and go, look, guys, I think we can boil these 30 outcomes down to 3 or 4. You know, this lets really focus on where you're making the most difference. And then that independent validation, term I use is that the charity sector is by and large marking its own homework. You know, their annual reports is going, we've marked our own homework, this is how great we are. You know, sometimes you might want to just think about getting an external organisations to mark your homework for you. It will give you far more credibility. In terms of options for doing that, the vast majority of organisations will go out to consultants. Consultants are great in terms of flexibility. They'll work to your approach and your timelines. They can get started quickly. The trade-offs, often very, very expensive, can be open-ended. You know, sometimes the results can be less tangible, it can be quite variable. Sometimes it might be a theory of change or supporting a strategy or supporting a framework, but not always ending in a full evaluation report. Academic partners, if you're lucky enough to have one, you know, they're quite expensive to commission, but sometimes you get them if they're interested in a particular piece of work or a particular topic. Like a lot of academic partners will get involved with early years children work, like we were discussing earlier. I've worked with a lot of academic partners myself. They bring obviously incredible levels of rigor and credibility. The trade-offs are that it can feel very top-down, and evaluation done to you, not with you, and the reports sometimes can be just too long and written in a language that no one can comprehend and no one reads them, and that's the real tragedy. I have to make a pitch for myself here, but Patchworks, we're trying to do it in a slightly different way. We're not consultancy. We're a service. So essentially, it's a monthly service charge, and it's got a very tangible result at the end. You know, you get an evaluation report like we saw with the Health Income Platform one. Our approach is what we call co-valuation, co-produced evaluation. So we do work with you, not to you. We co-design outcomes that are based on your mission, your work, but then we try to standardize them against global and national standards. And finally, yeah, we try to be affordable. Our prices are typically 300 to 400 quid a month, and a project takes 4 to 5 months. So, you know, typically under 2 grand. And the feedback I've had from a few clients is that they'd have paid probably about 8 to 10 grand for the report they got in there. So I hope you excuse me a little pitch. And then finally, just before we come back to bookending it and just look at the session, if you'd like me to follow up, if any of this has been helpful and I could help you in ways such as here, feedback on how you currently report. So if you want to, this is free, if you want to send me your current report and how you're reporting your impact, I'll be very happy to review that for free. Send you my comments. If you want any help clarifying what outcomes to measure, again, happy to do that. I do this type of consultancy into a couple of calls for free, and then people decide if they want to do a project or not. If it's not something you need right now, if you could just put into the chat, you know, A, B, or C, that'd be really helpful, and then I know who to follow up with, and I won't pester the rest of you. Just in terms of finishing off the session, we captured some stuff at the start. You can tell we've done too much talking. We run out of saliva. We captured some of your goals at the start. I wanted to just return to those. Top tips. Hopefully we've got some top tips. Again, I'm happy to kind of, if there's something specific we've not covered, we can cover it now in the bit of time we've got left. Capturing voice. I'm hoping that we covered that bit around, you know, the quotes, the turning some of those kind of interviews and case studies into stories, and we also covered the point about how to work with children. Evidence about breaking the bank. You know, I touched on that just now in terms of, you know, there's definitely a lot you can do internally to improve internally. And then if there's a point in time where it makes sense to bring external ones in, then some options there. Using storytelling, I think we've covered. Benchmarking, really good point. I don't think I did go into this one. I mentioned earlier that, you know, in terms of monitoring all you can, you know, monitor activity, do as much as you can, but the measurement of your against your outcomes, I would say annual is enough. So once a year, a impact report that goes out to your beneficiaries, your volunteers, your end users, you know, trying to capture those against those quant questions. You know, so you've got some of those stats that link back to your outcomes, capture some of those impact stories through open text fields, complement it with case studies and interviews. Doing that annually will give you a benchmark, because then if you can stay strong and rigorous and honest to your 4 or 5 outcomes, don't change them, then the next year when you look at those outcomes, you've got a benchmark. You can see how they've changed. The challenge a lot of charities I find is that by chasing, and I understand why, but chasing new funding and doing new programs, they grow their outcomes, it all becomes a bit too big, and then benchmarking becomes hard. You've got to try and keep that rigor, which is, as an organization, based on the mission we're trying to do, these are the 4 or 5 outcomes, and we're going to try and stick to those. Internal comms, value volunteering. We talked a little bit about this with Tracy earlier. Tip there around how to kind of push forward the value volunteering. My other big tip would be, in your report, like I did with Healthy Living Platform, include your volunteers as a beneficiary, but also as someone who's vital to your organisation in delivering your work. I think that's one of the interesting things for volunteers, is that they are beneficiary themselves. You'll all know this. Volunteering is, when I started volunteering, I only did it when I started Helpforce. I started volunteering locally. It was life-changing. I just suddenly realised that it was giving me things that I was missing in my life. It is incredible. So of course it benefits the volunteers, and so they should be listed as a beneficiary. But they're also a vital cog in the machine of your organisation. And some organisations I work with, there really is any volunteers. The organisation's nothing without the volunteers. My football club, we have no paid staff. There's 30 of us who volunteer for the club in kind of officer roles, 60 or 70 coaches. There is no football club. 400 kids get no football without us. And so, that value of volunteering has got to come through. Do not let your leadership devalue how important volunteers are to you. Okie dokie. Any other points or questions that people want to raise?
I was going to say, if people do, we've got loads in the chat that we may or may not have covered specifically, but we will share that with you, Paddy, so you can have a little look at that for yourself, and anything you feel you can share back, we will do that. I found that super interesting. It's a dark art, is the effective impact report that people actually go on to read and take on board. So hopefully everyone's found that super interesting, super useful. As I mentioned at the start, we will be sharing the video, we'll be sharing the presentation with you all. We're sharing Paddy's contact information for the people that do want to reach out directly to him. And we've got a list of the people that have sort of expressed an interest to Paddy to reach out with them directly. Paddy, thank you so much for that. Super, super useful. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, lovely to see you again, and we'll keep in touch and keep sharing stuff with the audience.